Okay. I'd like to welcome you, William E. Simpson II, as our special guest today. Thank you very much for taking the time to join with us. We're very grateful that you've taken the time. For attendees and people who'll be watching this as a recorded webinar, William is an ethologist. He's been studying free-roaming wild horses for some time. He's an award-winning producer of a mini documentary film, Wild Horses. He is the author of a new behavioral ecology of wild horses research paper. He's published 2 books. He's written 150 articles on wild horses, wildlife, and wildfires. Today, I'm joined as co-mediator. Everybody knows Dean Marsland. Dean Marsland is a wildlife Brumby photographer and wildlife photographer. He produces videography in the Australian Alpine Park. He has studied the ecological impact of Brumbies, other species, and of humans in the Australian Alpine Park. He's also a qualified leading firefighter at Shepparton Fire Station. He is lieutenant at Shepparton East as a volunteer. So welcome those attending, and I'm sure there'll be others who will join us shortly. Look, I think to get the ball rolling, I would really like to ask you, William, you've obviously done so much work with wild horses. Can you tell us, please, about what brought you to the study, the ethology of studying wild horses?
Right. Well, thank you for having me today. I always wanted to have a trip down under, so this will have to serve. But yeah, so I had just gotten back from a 4-year sailing expedition into the Sea of Cortez. We went down there originally to be funded to do a study of some marine invertebrates that had cancer compounds that were quite interesting to a chemist. And so we took our ship down there, and we were there for 4 years. But during the time that we were expecting our scientists to arrive, the principal investigator got bit by a brown recluse spider and became seriously ill. So I ended up just taking the time to do my own study down there and looking at the impacts of the changes in the atmosphere and the oceans on the coral reefs, the pinnipeds, the cetaceans. And then when I got back, I was so used to being in the wilderness after 4 years of being in the remote islands of the Sea of Cortez. I wanted to be in the wilderness on land. So moved into the wilderness here in the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument. We're on the south edge. Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument is about 46,000 hectares of diverse, remote mountainous wilderness. Topography ranges from about 2,500 feet to just about 7,000 feet in elevation above sea level. We have an extremely diverse set of flora and fauna here. We have 3 biomes squeezed together within 100 miles of distance. And so it's an amazing area, which is why it was protected by President Clinton. When I arrived here, we acquired some land on the very edge of the wilderness area and set up our research station because I have a background in livestock production and growing up on a working ranch with livestock, sheep, goats, pigs, pulled Herefords. And then before I went to Oregon State University as a science major. And so when we moved up into the wilderness here, I noticed these horses and found out very quickly that they had been here for hundreds of years. They were originally observed by Sir Francis Drake in 1580. And I started watching these horses and I started noticing their behavior was considerably different than the many horses we had on the ranch. And we had all different kinds of breeds of riding horses. I noticed that they were very robust. They were sustaining, terrible injuries from predator attacks and surviving. I was watching their behavior on the landscape. They could traverse rocky, vertical lava cliffs in areas where deer didn't even go. Their hooves were like made out of stone. A regular horse couldn't survive that. Domestic horses couldn't survive it. And then I also was experiencing the rejuvenation of the landscape because of their reseeding ability. As a non-ruminant herbivore, Oregon State did a study on the germinability of horse dung, and I was, of course, reading all this. There was a lot going on all at the same time because I'm one of these guys that really gets into it, and so when I'm not out with the horses, I'm reading till midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, and so I quickly evolved into a space where we were doing active management as far as going out and setting up observation stations, cameras, so we could look at the horses night and day. And then, and I was visiting a lot of the area and documenting the trees. They use trees as shelters. So they're big, heavy animals. They're their largest herbivore here. So they break off all the fire ladders, the low hanging limbs on these conifers. And they also graze the fuel under the trees because they're using the trees as shelter year round. And so I had documented the area fairly well, and with drone photographs, with ground photographs, videos, we have over 500,000 photographs and probably over 200 hours of video. And then when the big fire came, I saw what happened. I saw the before and after, and because I was on the fire line 9 days as a technical advisor to CAL FIRE, and I saw the fire, which was burning, when it came over the mountain range, fueled by grass and brush and trees. I mean, we saw a wall of flames that was at 200 feet tall. But when it got down to where the 1 hour class fuels, the grass and brush, had been reduced, the fire was slowing down quite a bit because it didn't have that accelerant, because grass and brush burns when we had a wind on this fire for all 9 days. And so the fire slowed down, and having been in small fires before as a logger, I saw this change in the fire behavior, and it was quite remarkable to watch the fire lay down. And then CAL FIRE was able to actually use fire breaks that had been grazed in by the horses and position men and equipment, and firefighters, I should say, in front of the fire, because we do have a lot of female firefighters now. In front of the fire, in what we, when you fight fire up here, we call sometimes fighting, you want to fight fire with 1 foot in the black, which means you try to do a back burn and then get rid of some fuel, and that becomes your line where you establish yourself and then fight the fire if the wind changes. And so, but having fuel reduced by the horses, it was like fighting fire with 1 foot in the black. We had a safe zone, and we could, men and firefighters positioned right in front of the wall of fire coming, and they were able to fight it very effectively, and that saved this, what would be our national park. And then I started writing my study, and to answer your question, I started having all of the pieces to really put together the preliminary study about a balanced ecosystem and how you normalize wildfire. You basically devolve it, and the science tells us that when you lose your herbivore, catastrophic fire evolves. And so we've, essentially here we have an effective herbivore, and we saw the fire, we were able to fight it effectively. So that's how all that began.
So, Dean, did you have any questions?
Not at this stage, because my personal experience and observations 100% concur with Williams. Here in Australia, most of our catastrophic fires have a point of origin that's driven by strong northwesterly winds, which makes long, skinny, fast-moving fires. Inadvertently, what happens then is they get hit by a southwesterly front. Now, that front moving through actually compresses and speeds up those northwesterly winds that are coming down from the hot, dry, arid centre of Australia, which then turns the flank or side of the fire into an extremely long fire front, being driven by 100, 130, 150 kilometre an hour winds. And history shows it. It doesn't matter whether it was the recent Black Summer fires, Black Saturday fires, Ash Wednesday fires. They all have that same behaviour of that dry, hot wind being dragged down from the centre, creating that long, skinny front that then gets hit by that southwesterly change. And it's easy to fight a fire that's only 500 metres wide. But when that gets hit by a southwesterly change, and that fire front is now 27 kilometres wide, firefighters, well, we have a lot of trouble fighting it. It's in terrain we can't access. But interestingly, all of those resorts in our alpine country that we get up there with our pumpers and crews to protect are all grazed to the south and the southwest by wild horses. And amazingly, that makes our job so much easier in trying to protect those alpine resorts from an impeding fire. Because as William said, that short grass is akin to having 1 foot in the black, which that's what we call it. It's previously burnt ground. Because it's already been burnt, it can't burn again. It makes us much safer. It gives us a nice anchor point and a safe place to operate from. The horses are providing that on unburnt ground because the grasses where they graze are only a couple of inches tall rather than the traditional 18 to 24 inches that those alpine grasses get to. So having the presence of those horses in those areas actually helps us protect the townships, protect the alpine resorts, protect the billions and billions of dollars of human infrastructure that exist up there. And it's all done by something that already exists and just happily goes around. You know, the reseeding is another terrific point, because eating that tall, dried out top off the grasses, which fire loves, it helps regenerate those nice green moist shoots because they have moisture in it. Fire doesn't like moisture. That helps slow the fire as well. But then they move to another area. They have a poop. Those seeds regenerate in that beautiful, perfect biosphere that is manure, nutrient-rich, moisture-rich, warmth. It's everything those seeds need to germinate, which then helps minimise erosion, but also creates those short green grasses that help slow fire.
Well, that's what you as a firefighter have experienced in this times. William, in your work, the wild horses. So what I've read, you have mobs of, say, or a band of, say, 150 wild horses. Is that how does it work? Tell me. And also the actual grazing area that creates the break, how large is it? And can you describe what actually happens?
Sure. So we, when I first moved up into the wilderness, our herd, like I said, had been here. It was observed in 1580 by Sir Francis Drake when he sailed up our coast. That was just 88 years after Columbus first arrived in North America. So these weren't reintroduced horses. These were post-Ice Age, a splinter population. And so because of the demand for horses by ranchers, I mean, these wild horses were so vibrant and so healthy that a lot of the pioneers that moved into the area here in the 1800s saw these great horses. I mean, they were better than the cavalry's horses. They don't get sick. They got hooves of stone. You know, they're strong, they're fast. And so there was a lot of demand from local ranches for these wild horses. So the population got pulled down. And there was a lot of course, the reintroduced horses and brought back in. But what I'm getting to is when I first got here, we had a less than 100. There was about 70, 80, something like that, adults. We don't count juveniles because they get eaten so fast by the wolves, the coyotes, the bears, the lions. So we've been rescuing horses with our team. Our nonprofit has a lot of people working with us, all volunteers. And a lot of these BLM wild horses that get rounded up end up, unfortunately and illegally somehow, in these slaughter auctions. So we've actually adopted and brought in more horses, because the thing about a grazing herbivore is if you don't have an effective number for your landscape based on the carrying capacity, you will burn. I mean, you can't have too few animals, okay? And I'm going to make an important point here, because Dr. William J. Ripple, who's the professor of forestry emeritus from Oregon State, did a really big study. It's out there. It's called The Collapse of the Herbivore by William J. Ripple. And he has a whole section about what happens when you lose your herbivore. And he talks about Australia in particular. And he says specifically, he quotes Tim Flannery, and he says that there's scant evidence that wildfire existed in Australia until the disappearance of your megafauna after the arrival of humans. In the 18th century, people showed up, or 17th century in Australia, and basically kangaroos started getting killed and things like that started happening, and then other herbivores were brought in, but there was a big disparity, and I still think you probably don't have enough herbivores in the right places, but it's the science shows that catastrophic fire was something that didn't occur in Australia prior to colonialization there. And so we have that science in the ground, because every time there's a big fire, you get a layer of ash in the soil column. So as you dig down, you can see where Krakatoa exploded, and you can track. It's like rings on a tree, but going down in the soil. So, and soil scientists are pretty good about the accuracy of this. So with our herd, what we did is we built it up to 150, and then the county gave us ownership of the herd because they saw the value that the horses had during the Klamathon fire of 2018 and how valuable it was in creating this large fire break. It was about 5,000 acres of clear, grazed ground, like Dean was saying. It was stubble, 2-3 inches, but it was also reseeded. They ate it off, but they reseeded in their dung. And of course, their dung contains microbiome, very essential to soil. And soil scientists, gardeners talk about it, inoculating soil to make it more productive, right? And so the horses did that, but this is a very beautiful area up there. And so it's about 5,000 acres, but we also, on the edges of it, they go into the forest, and they graze fuel under the trees. I've got a lot of videos of horses cleaning the forest floor. They remove certain leaves, a lot of the grass under the trees. And of course, they use the trees as shelter, so they break off the fire ladders. And so the neat thing that was kind of really, as a former logger, and I fought a few fires, is seeing the fire. I was on the fire line watching this fire, and it burned right under the trees, and it didn't kill the trees or burn the trees. They survived the trees like they used to here 100 years ago. We never lost entire conifer forests because these are fire evolved trees. They need fire for reproduction. But now, because these fires are so hot because of the prodigious grass, because we're missing 3 million deer here, and 3 million deer eat 3.5 million tons of grass and brush every year. They're gone, so we have 3.5 million tons of grass and brush. It burns the hottest, I mean, you put a wind on it, it's like a blacksmith's forge. You pump that bellows, and that's how you get the forge hot enough to melt steel, right? Well, that's what the wind does. It accelerates the amount of oxygen, and it speeds oxidation combustion. And so our herd manages pretty well, about 5,000 acres with 150.
That's a very large area, isn't it? That's a very large area of grazing land for horses. Yeah,
and it's strategic. See, that's the other thing too. You shouldn't just put horses anywhere. Okay, I'm a livestock guy, so I don't believe in commingling livestock with horses. That's not good, because if you're in the livestock business, you can't have predators around because they'll put you out of business. So when I grew up on the ranch, one of my jobs is to ride around on my horse, and I had to kill predators, because if we lost our calves and our lambs, then I wouldn't be getting a new pair of jeans for next school year, or I may not get a jacket because we wouldn't have the money. I mean, ranching is hard. It ain't easy. I get it. But the thing is if you put horses in the right place where they're going to protect, like Dean was talking about, boundaries, we're talking about setting up a fire resistant landscape on the edge of area needs protection, like a community or a resort. And the thing is you don't want to just strip it to the dirt with just any herbivore. You want to have it reseeded because you want it to remain beautiful. Tourists don't want to go there to an arid landscape that's devoid of fauna. They want to see butterflies, they want to see bees, they want to see all the little critters. And if you take away their food by using a ruminid, cattle, sheep, goats, or ruminids, means they're very effective digesters. The seeds they poop out, they're dead. They don't grow. Okay, so on those areas, you can set it up and manage it intelligently using equids. Other areas for livestock production, sure, you don't want to have horses there. It's just not good for anybody. And the other thing is dingoes now, your natural predator, are rare. You know, I looked at some of the research on your dingoes. You know, several scientists have commented that on most of the continent, they're either rare or extinct. They're just not present. And so the dingo was managing predation. Now they also eat horses, you know, they'll eat cattle, sheep, goats, kangaroos, you know, all the wallabies, you name it. But because they're gone, now you've got issues
Well,
with balance. You don't have.
we do have dingoes, but unfortunately, there's a policy. It's a policy of poisoning dingoes for the agricultural industry. Period. That's what it's about.
You have,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's about having the right balance. You need enough dingoes, not just we have some. You need enough to manage their natural prey. Okay, so if you've brought in, you've got some non-native horses, you know, there's no horse fossils in Australia. Contrarily, we have lots of horse fossils in North America because that's where they all came from. So, but you know, the thing is you need a predator to manage the population. So that's why when you're balancing an ecosystem to protect a town or a community or a resort, you're going to want to have a balance. You're going to need all the right people there, the critters. And then in the livestock areas, of course, they don't want dingoes. You know, I understand that. So you have to manage them as almost like a monoculture in some respects. You need to have livestock in one area. And if you're looking for real fire protection, and also maintaining a vibrant ecosystem, the horses are ideal. And that's not to say you exclude other native animals on your national parks. And there's a way to, you know, the other thing people, I'm going to go a little further here. The other thing people talk about is that, oh, horses they're really bad. They step on the frogs or they do this or do that. Okay, that's not true. Anybody who's around wild horses and studies them knows they're very careful where they put their feet. There's a lot of reasons for that. Number one, if they put their foot in a hole, they could break their leg. Okay, and that's never good. If they put their foot in the wrong spot, they get bit by a venomous snake and die. That's not good. So, and the horses know these things. So they're very careful about foot placement. They don't step on animals. I've watched horses around little squirrels right underneath them, and they gently push a squirrel aside because they don't want it in the way. I've seen horses take a squirrel that was drowning out of a water trough, pick it up gently, and put it on the ground. They're very compassionate and respectful of the other wildlife. Okay, they're very intelligent animals.
So, and have you observed horses in the wild protecting other species? Like, actually, there's obviously a lot of talk about introducing donkeys to protect livestock, farming stock from predators. We've got this strange belief in it. Some people believe they call dingoes wild dogs, which is another introduced terminology by the poisons industry to justify poisoning dingoes, which are our apex land predator. But people are suggesting the introduction of donkeys could protect any sheep or cattle. Not that dingoes eat cattle much; they don't favour cattle. But what are your thoughts about that? What is your experience with equid protecting as protectors of any other stock?
I do know we do that here. People bring in a donkey. Of course, the lions will still eat the donkey. You know, they'll try to protect. They're kind of like a shepherd animal in that respect. Horses their brain is 2/3 the size of our brain. So if you have I have a Queensland Heeler, that's my dog here on the ranch, and a horse's brain is 4 times the size of a dog's brain. They're very smart. And so they have a very complex society. And so horse family bands, they're in bands, and the bands make up the herd, right? So you have just like a population. They will protect each other. The band stallion and the lead mare will take care of the family in that manner. But as far as protecting, going out of their way to protect other animals. I haven't seen them do that other than, like I said, with small animals that were like drowning or things like that. I've seen them, take them out of their situation, because, we got water troughs and the squirrels jump in there thinking they're going to get a drink, and then they can't get out and they're treading water and they will drown. And I've seen horses just carefully pick one up and take it out and put it on the ground. I mean, that shows me a level of compassion and intelligence. That horse knew that squirrel was drowning, it was in trouble, and did help it. So, but I think my key focus is fire and maintaining ecological balance. And I could put livestock where I am. I have land and I could put, but the problem is one, they're going to get depredated because we have lions, wolves, bears, and coyotes here, which are like your dingo. So if I put livestock here, they're going to be eating the livestock, and I would lose money. So the next thing is then I have to shoot all the native species predators, and I don't want to have to do that because they take out the predators are critical in your environment because they will remove sick and diseased animals from the landscape. And that's very important because what's happening here in America now is we have a deadly disease. It's called chronic wasting disease.
It's called what,
it's a
sorry?
prion disease. Chronic wasting disease.
Okay, yeah.
Or CWD. And it's a prion disease. It's not a bacteria. It's not a virus. It's a prion. A prion is a misshapen protein. Now, chronic wasting disease is fatal. There's no treatment. It's absolutely fatal. And the thing is it can infect other species because it's a misshapen protein. The vector is the vegetative material. So it's in 29 states in our deer herds here. Cervids, all cervidae get it. So deer, elk, caribou, moose, they all get it. And it's fatal. It's in 29 states epidemic. Well, it can jump into cows. It could jump into the sheep. And when humans get a prion disease, it's called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. And there's no treatment. In every species, it's fatal. You die. Now, the first stages of the disease in deer, they become a little bit disoriented. It's kind of like they're drunk. Well, the thing is when you have enough predators on the landscape, they grab that animal immediately and they don't spread the disease. Well, guess what's happened? In the large areas where livestock production's happening and ranchers have effectively removed all the apex predators, the sick deer no longer gets taken and he walks around and gives it to everybody. And now we have chronic wasting disease in 29 states and so if you eat a deer with it, you get sick and it'll kill you. So, and so the point here is we have to be very careful about, in Australia, I would be very careful about depleting the dingo population because they're uniquely able to see a weak or sick or diseased or elderly animal, a native species animal, and remove it. Well, they also do that with your horses, and that maintains the vigor of the species. It's called natural selection, and it's critical. You absolutely have to have it. So with our herd of horses here, I'd rather have the horses here and have natural selection. It maintains my population, right? So I don't overpopulate and I still get my fire protection, but I also, my deer, we have deer and elk here. I know that those predators are out there, and as soon as any animal gets sick, they're going to take it out of the population and it won't spread. Because the last thing I want is that disease spreading in my herd of deer here and elk.
Well, the destruction of the ecological balance in Australia, the outcome of that has been outbursts in growth of both cats, wild cats and foxes, which has been a massive problem because it's actually the foxes that are predating on sheep. Well, that's part of the problem. So that is already a problem with the removal of a lot of dingoes with 1080 poison. 1080 poison in Australia is just out of control. Absolutely appalling. Another issue that we've got here is, and it's similar to what's happening in America with BLM, is there are outrageous claims about numbers, population surveys that are done that arrive at certain numbers. In America, it's to do with competing interests for the agricultural industry. Pardon me, cattle grazing. Cattle grazers want public lands to graze their cattle. In Australia, it's the brumbies that we are speaking about within national parks, from Victoria to Canberra to the ACT and New South Wales. So that's what we Brumby Action Group and other groups, we focus on those areas because they're within national parks, because they're controlled and managed by parks managers. But the population surveys that have been produced thus far have actually been flawed. We've found an independent biostatistician did a bit of research on the numbers and found that they were flawed due to the numbers that were observed over a number of years were combined and then sent off for peer review. So what they have been relying on and claiming that there's 18,000 brumbies is in fact probably for the whole of the Australian Alpine Park, it may well be 5,000 or who knows what. So it's quite a problem we've got here. So it's all species that are interfered with, whether it's wild living brumbies who perform a significant role within the ecological balance as well, and dingoes. We've got a big problem in Australia with biodiversity for that reason. So Dean,
right. Yeah, one of the problems we have here is that the money involved in mining, gas, oil, mineral extraction from public lands, where a lot of the grazing happens, because it's cheap grazing, right? The livestock industry will pressure basically BLM doesn't do the counting of horses. They have the United States Geological Service do it. So they have arguable deniability. They have a firewall. So they can always point the finger, well, we didn't do it, right? They did it. So, but they regularly double the observed population so that they can say that, oh, it's twice as many so let's say there's 100 horses on an HMA. So they'll go in and they'll say, oh, there's 200 horses. That's way too many. We need to remove 100 so that we get back to 100 horses. Well, what happens is there's really just 100 and they said there's 200 and they say we got to take off half. They take it down to 0 that way.
That's
so they
exactly
play a
what's
numbers.
happening here. Yep, that's what's happening in Kosciuszko
Yeah,
National Park. The
Right.
management plan provides that there can be up to 3,000 brumbies, but with the flawed population surveys that have come out with crazy numbers like 14 to 18 to 23,000, then the parks managers say, well, this part of the park, we've got to get these numbers down. So they've been ripping them out. They've removed something like 800 brumbies by rehoming, shot something like 500 the last 12 months roughly. So it's how they're going to get it down to 0. Yet these brumbies in Kosciuszko National Park, the only national park that has legislation that recognises those brumbies' heritage value and protects them. But this is how they're getting around it. And it's so far, nobody has yet had the capacity to take out a restraining order. So that's what's happening here. It's very dire. There's also been a Senate inquiry into the presence of brumbies in the Australian Alpine Park. And there will be a recommendation made about brumbies generally. And that's why we thought having you as a guest today to talk about your experience with wild free roaming horses fighting fires was really timely. So it's really great that you're able to spend this time with us. I think too that the value of our brumbies has never been researched, never been any research directly into impacts.
You have a really good point there, because what I did one day is I spent a whole day talking to people about fuel reduction, and Dean probably can appreciate this. Because we have prescribed burning, we have mulching, we have mowing, and some of the Mennonites and the Amish people still remove fire fuel using a scythe. which is the stick with the blade on the end, because they don't believe in mechanized equipment. And so I've interviewed all those different people looking at what does it cost to remove the fuel, the abundant fuel that's causing a significant risk to your landscape and your structures. What does it cost per acre to get rid of that? And I got all that math and I came up with an average. And then I know each horse grazes 5.5 tons of grass and brush a year. So what I did is I calculated over the average lifespan of a horse how much grass and brush they remove and what it would cost to duplicate that with our best, man-made technologies, right? And it turns out that when you do the math and applying minimum wage at the low end of it, for instance, hand labor, which is the one way to do it, that's all the way up to prescribed burning, which can be $4,000 an acre to more if there's structures that need protection during a prescribed burn. I did all the math, and it turns out that each wild horse in a fuel management role is worth $72,000 over its lifespan. Now, $72,000 per horse. You'd have to be like crazy to eliminate a fuel reducer giving you that kind of value. That's good value,
So
and it saves life.
So are you speaking about in say public land? Are you like are you or private grazing land
On any
or public land?
on any land.
Hmm.
Yeah, on any land. If you've got, let's say, the land around an airport or the land around a ranch or the land around a city or a town, you've got fuel coming up every year. Annual grass and brush comes back every year. How do you deal with it? Some places you can mow it easily. If it's around an airport, you could do a lawnmower if you want to deal with fossil fuel, or you could put goats, because quite frankly, around an airport or an industrial building, I don't care if I get reseeding, right? I don't care about that because that's an industrial area. Goats are perfect for that. But when I'm in a national park, I don't want goats to strip off my native seed bank and my cover crop, because then I don't get the water infiltration into the aquifer anymore. When I don't have good cover crop, I get abnormal levels of erosion. That affects my fishery. All the eggs, the fish that are spawning in the gravels. If you get abnormal erosion, it fills in the gravel. The eggs don't survive. Your fish run dies. I mean, you have to look at the right tool in the right place, and that's what I'm saying. In the national parks, there, Australia should be focusing on a Brumby wild horse protection program, because they're the best solution and they're the cheapest. You're not going to get any. How are you going to reseed if you go in there with goats and cattle? And because that's what they're doing here now. They're trying to sell everybody on using cattle and sheep in the national forest. And I'm talking to people and I'm going, okay, fine. They go in there, and after about 7 to 10 years, because the seed bank takes about 5 to 7 years to deplete. Those are the random seeds that haven't generated on the landscape. Because plants, nature is perfect. When the plant throws off seeds, they don't all germinate immediately. Some of them germinate next year or the year after. Some of them take 5 years. So you put the goats or the cows out there and they graze it and the grass comes back and everybody goes, look, it's fine. Well, not really, because you're declining year over year. So you have to look at the application, and that's what's critical.
Yeah, and we experienced that here over the last probably 15 years. We have our mountain ash and our alpine ash forests, which are up there in that high country where brumbies roam. And those trees take a certain amount of time to reach maturity and get to the stage where they'll produce seeds. And as William was just saying, like, some of those seeds will germinate this year, some might take a couple of more years to germinate. Well, when we had those hot fires go through, they took out a heap of the adult trees, but they helped crack the seed pods of some that were laying on the forest floor, and we got some regeneration. But that followed with another very hot fire 3 years later, which now took out those seedlings that were trying to emerge to replace the adult trees that had died. There was still a latent seed back in the forest floor that sadly got wiped out in exactly the same area 3 years later by another extremely hot fire. So we ended up with a period across 10 to 11 years, whereby large amounts of our alpine ash forests basically became extinct because the latent seed beds that had regenerated were wiped out 3 years later. And then the next one was wiped out 3 years later. And we got to a point we had no seed bank left in the forest floor. So they actually had to turn to our native hardwood timber industry, logging industry, which conveniently Victoria's government's just pulled the plug on and decided to shut down, because it was that timber industry that had a seed bank sitting down in a warehouse in Melbourne somewhere that they could go to take seeds and scatter from their aeroplane, and others were planted into tube stock in a nursery that then people went and plugged into the ground. If we left, as William has said, our large herbivores that don't destroy every seed that they eat in those areas, cleaning up that brush, cleaning up the undergrowth, cleaning up those ladder fuels, the fires that run through those areas do not burn as hot, they do not burn as intensely, they do not happen as frequently, and therefore our native ash forests wouldn't need us to go over in an aeroplane and scatter seeds on the wind or plant tube stock to try and put back what we lost. If we just looked at it holistically and realistically, horses help provide the brakes, pull up the fire, slow the fire. You know, we'd be benefiting ourselves. And I find it really hard to fathom, and William touched on it earlier when he mentioned, you know, using a lawnmower around an industrial area or goats and the whole fossil fuel thing. They're talking now of this global warming and rah. Scientists are estimating how many tons of carbon are released into the atmosphere every time we have a major fire. And if we really want to diminish greenhouse gases and we really want to go down the climate change, global warming way of thinking, and how are we going to reduce those impacts on the environment, they want to move from coal and fossil fuels to EVs and wind farms and the perfect way to assist in reducing fire frequency, fire intensity, and fire impact in our landscape is to use the one herbivore that exists in Australia that has the capacity to reseed the very environment that it lives in, rather than going out doing controlled burns, rather than going out and using dozers to push all of the vegetation off the surface to create a mineral earth fire break to stop a fire, which then conveniently, and again, it happens historically, what immediately follows major catastrophic fires that create their own weather systems purely by that thermal uplift of convection of hot gases into the air that then cool, is major rain events. And the more we bear back our fire breaks with machinery exposing ground that then gets hit with these major rain events, the more erosion, the more siltation occurs in our waterways. So we're actually, in the methodology that scientists in Australia are currently suggesting as our main toolkit, we are actually bringing about exactly what it is we say we're trying to prevent. They need to seriously have a look at it. William's on the money. We've got the perfect tool here. It actually cost us nothing. If we had to pay $72,000 per person to go out and do what a wild horse does for us in our environment, our governments would be broke, bankrupt. You know?
Yeah, that's for sure. Dean, you're so right. And I'll tell you, I'll take it one step more. When after we had a big fire in the Kalmiopsis Wilderness area in Oregon, and it was called the Silver Fire. Oregon went in and replanted, spent $10 million replanting trees, little seedlings, you know, in this area to try to replant or reestablish the lost forest. Well, then what happened, see, because there's no more deer, the Oregon is down 500,000 deer. All those little trees were sitting there and the grass and brush grew up around it. And normally the deer would eat the grass and brush down. They don't eat conifers. They don't like it. Horses don't eat conifers. There's too much terpenes. They don't like that. So normally the deer would come in and keep it grazed down by those little seedlings. So if there was a lightning strike and a little fire, it wouldn't kill them little baby trees. Well, because the deer were gone, the seedlings, $10 million of the seedlings were out there. The grass grew up around it, nothing there, no herbivores. A fire came through, it killed every tree. All the little seedlings got burned alive. $10 million down the tube.
Oh,
You
my
know,
goodness.
that's the thing.
I don't know whether, are you aware whether there's been, there probably wasn't any replanting after the 2019 wildfires, because there is that regrowth that comes from burning in Australian parks anyway. I just don't know. I doubt that there was any replanting. In fact, most of the national parks are neglected. Whilst they've removed any cattle, but which clearly don't have the same benefits as brumbies, but they're busily ripping out brumbies to allegedly protect native species, threatened species. That's the argument, that the brumbies are impacting on habitat. There is no research that says brumbies impact native species. What it says is, what the reports say is, it might impact habitat, the grass, might squash the grass. And Dean's got some great thoughts on this.
Dean has got some really good points, and I'm glad he's on the ground there, because he's dead. He's right on the money, because we had a big fire here last year called the McKinney Fire in Siskiyou County, California. I think it was 65,000 acres right along the Klamath River. That's one of the biggest salmon and trout rivers on the West Coast. Okay, that fire burned, it scorched earth, burned everything. It pasteurized the soil 10 inches deep, destabilized the root. Well, right during the fire, it created its own weather. Huge thunderstorm came up, and there was a giant debris flow, mud from the ground that just got burned, went into the river. And there was a fish kill 75 miles long, killed every fish in the Klamath River. Outdoor Sports, I think it was Sports Illustrated, did a whole story about the fish kill in the Klamath River for the McKinney Fire. And see, that's the thing. If that grass and brush had been maintained, because California doesn't have the deer anymore, we're down through about 3 million deer. If that fire burned at a lower intensity, that wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't have 75 miles of dead fish floating on the Klamath River. You know, that then the scientists, I'm just wondering, we're burning, but we don't seem to be learning. I mean, I guess if you get a PhD now, and I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, because we have a lot of smart PhDs out there, but they have to get a little courage and step forward. I couldn't get 10 cents to do a wild horse study from any government. I couldn't get a grant. I had to use all my own money, because the livestock industry, they just tell USDA and DOI and all these guys, no, we're not want to fund that. And then the big companies, you know, that support the livestock industry, Cargill, Monsanto, Bayer, John Deere, they tell their lobbyists, you know, tell these guys, no money for horse studies. We don't want to know about them. Just get rid of them. And that's the problem we have. There's very narrow thinking, small-minded, short vision.
There is a question that's come through about that wild horse and cattle. It's from Lisa Ryan. Be interested in William's views on the threats to US wild horses who are native and were living there first because of the US beef industry, which are introduced. What are your thoughts on that, William?
Well, it's a monetary driven extinction event. You know, they have a powerful lobby. We've had 30 years of activism funded with over $100 million that hasn't worked. And the reason being is because everybody keeps wanting to have the horses commingled with the livestock. That will not work. Okay. We have to change how we're looking at it. Everybody needs to understand the livestock industry is going to have beef because 97% of Americans want beef. So what do? If we force the bad position and we say those horses have got to stay there commingled with livestock, that's going to be bad for the horses because number one, they don't have their natural predators. Number two, because there's no natural predators, they're going to overpopulate. That's going to cause roundups. That's going to cause the use of sterilization, all of which are bad for horses. The solution, which a lot of people who are making money in the advocacy now, supporting Gonacon and PZP, there's a lot of horse advocates doing the wrong thing because they get paid. And so that's got to stop. We've got to say, hold it, this isn't working, 30 years of failure. Let's do something different. Let's take the horses and move them to where they do good and where they don't interfere with the livestock industry. Everybody wins then. Everybody wins. There's no.
Did you see the recent debate between your Senator Hanson and Scott Beckstead, a wild horse advocate? Have you seen that debate? Because that was a numbers argument and an argument that wild horses are causing impact and harming native species. It was very similar to the arguments that those in power here have against Brumbies. So that was a very powerful debate in which Scott Beckstead was able to put forward some pro-wild horse thoughts. So it might be worthwhile watching. I don't know if you can, I'll send it to you. I'll share it with you.
I'm not a fan of Scott Beckstead. He used to work at HSUS, and HSUS is the patent holder for some of these sterility drugs. And, you know, he was there when Marty Irby and Wayne Pacelli, Wayne Pacelli had to leave in shame for, you know, all kinds of nasty stuff. But the bottom line is, you know, these guys, I renamed it the disappointment in the desert because, you know, Scott doesn't understand. He's a lawyer. He's never done what Dean and I are doing and other scientists. He doesn't live among the wild horses. You know, we're studying horses the way Jane Goodall studied the apes in Africa. We actually call it the Goodall method because we're so close to studying the horses. We can smell them. We can look at their hooves. We can see the parasites on their body. That's how you really understand how they're impacting the landscape. You have to be close up. Well, that takes a huge commitment. I had to live here 6 months before I got accepted into the family band. I had to sacrifice my time to be in the wilderness continuously. I've been here 9 years continuously now. So it's one thing to read about things in a book. It's another thing to be out there 24/7. Like, see, all the anthropologists before Jane Goodall, they were all had PhDs. Guess what? They never saw apes making and using tools. It took a woman who, and of course, she didn't have a college degree. She went out there, but she was a good observer, and the troop let her in. And then she saw the magic. It was magic then, because she got to see, because the leader of that ape troop said, okay, you're not going to hurt us. You can hang around with us. It changed science. It changed science. So the thing is we have to stop fighting the wrong battle. We have to say, okay, livestock industry, we know you're going to end up having your way. We need to do something different for the horses that works for everybody. Instead of pushing a bad position, they have to get moved into the areas where they serve a really good purpose. And guess what? We have 353 million acres of private forest in America, half of it's wilderness where there's no livestock production. Okay, you can't do it in these areas. So we put the horses there, they save the forest, the wildlife, they live free and wild, and they provide a public benefit. That relieves the livestock industry. They're no longer fighting. It ends the range war. But people make money off war. I mean, the horse industry is no different. People are making money off the plight of wild horses on both sides of it. You know, wars, people make money on wars. I believe it.
I do know that Scott Beckstead, like, he left Humane Society. He's not a supporter of Gonacon, and I'm not even sure that he would be very supportive nowadays of fertility control, to be honest. PZP. We don't have PZP in Australia anyway. It's never been run through the APVMA getting approval status. So it's just not available on that kind of basis to be used, apart from which the parks managers won't use it because we've got such broad acres to be able to identify the Brumbies each, whatever period of time the cycle, is going to make it very difficult. But I think it's an issue. They don't want to deploy the finances on Brumbies. It's a socio-political debate about whether or not we have Brumbies at all. So that's I believe is the issue for us. So Dean, did you have any more questions that you wanted to run by William?
I've got one I want to run by William, and I've got a feeling I know what the answer is going to be, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So across our conversation, William's touched on the fact that Australia's megafauna gone, don't have them anymore. Science has acknowledged it. Science has recognised that with them not being there anymore, our landscape has changed. Those of us with some intelligence realise it's changed for the worse. Sadly, it seems the current scientific thinking is lock it up and leave it, and it'll sort itself out over thousands and thousands of years and get back to where it used to be, is the best approach. I have always worked from that position of balance. The fact is the European settlements are here now, cities are getting bigger, more and more areas being taken up by agriculture and things. We have to find a balance. And to me, the smart balance is to get large grazing herbivores back into our environment, because the benefits of large grazing herbivores in any ecosystem are essential. So the question, and it's a straightforward question now to William, is understanding that, yes, horses are not native to Australia, understanding that donkeys and goats and things like that, deer even, are not native to Australia. They've all been introduced. If you could choose one large grazing herbivore from any place in the world that's not native to Australia that you could install into the Australian environments to bring about the ecological improvements that need to occur to replace those large grazing herbivores that no longer exist here in native form, which animal would you choose and why?
Well, it depends on the area. So if it was agricultural land that could be managed using agricultural methodology, in other words, you can reseed it, you can drill in seed, so you can graze it, you can reseed it, you can manage the land. In those areas, I think you have a pretty big choice of various herbivores. You could use an herbivore that provides a financial benefit like sheep or livestock, cattle, goats, whatever you want. However, in our wilderness areas, or like you've got in the national parks, I think in those areas, the clear choice is the horse, because it's the only one that reseeds. And reseeding with aerial, the problem with everybody has their own, the man with the hammer sees everything as a nail. But the thing is you got to remember, nature, horses have been on the planet for about 50 million years in North America. 4 million years ecobolists have been here in North America, and they've been in other places for about 1 million years, in Australia just in the recent few centuries. But the thing about the horse is that the way it reseeds, the seed is protected in the dropping. It's not, when you do aerial broadcast of seeds, a lot of them get taken by birds and insects and digested and subject to solar radiation. They get killed. It's costly. It's costly. So, we don't have infinite sums of money. The governments need to realize the people are not grapes to be squished for the juices. They have to be smart with our taxes. And the smartest way in the parks where you want to protect your ecosystems, that one herbivore that I would put there, as far as a keystone herbivore or ecosystem engineer, whatever you want to call them, is the horse. Because not only do they keep the fuel managed, but they reseed, which benefits all the other evolved fauna. All the other evolved fauna benefit. They reseed in a way where the seeds are effective. They reintroduce the microbiome. They move seeds. There have been studies you can move natural seeds across large landscapes. So they actually reintroduce native flora into areas maybe where it's been taken down by fire, where the soil has been damaged. They re-inoculate it, they reseed it. So that is in those areas. It's not either or one shoe fits all. It's in those areas you need the right herbivore. The keystone herbivore is the horse.
This is
it's
really
it's a
so. What is absolutely ludicrous in this country is that state governments are using money advanced by the federal government, specifically post-wildfire recovery money. They are using that money to remove brumbies. It's just ludicrous. I find it ludicrous.
It's really
It's how they're shooting
really
brumbies.
It shows a misapplication of economic political pressure from the livestock industry. They don't need to remove them everywhere. They need to make an agreement, because it's the livestock people driving that politics. You know, they need to understand, look, you're going to have your area, but we need to have these areas, and you don't need to be affecting the politics on these national parks.
Because well, we don't have livestock in national parks. We don't have cattle. We don't have cattle in the national parks. So they removed the brumbies, and we've got no large herbivore.
Yeah, well, that's how it started out here. There wasn't livestock in the national parks. Guess what they do? They introduce them, then the predators start eating them, then they shoot all the wolves and the bears so they can have a predator-free environment. You know, it's creep. It's greed, and it's economic creep. And basically people have to say, look, you know, there's got to be some boundaries here. You know, it can't be everything livestock and you know, we're going to just do what you want to do over here because you're making money over here. You know, economics, people are greedy, and greed needs to be controlled. If anything needs to be controlled, it's greed.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got another very good question here from Helen. She says, everything that Marilyn says about numbers and dingoes is true. It is very frustrating and dire. Difficult to know how to help stop this. I believe you have a great understanding of ecology, William. Can you tell us about any other ecologists that are interested in your work and this topic? I think I read somewhere Wayne Linklater was interested. I have found that there is closed scientific circles that is most puzzling in Australia. It's a long question.
Yeah. So Wayne recently joined our board of our advisory board of Wild Horse Fire Brigade. Wayne is a Kiwi, and he taught at Victoria University. He's a professor down there at one of the big universities, but he did a study down there on wild horses. So yeah, he has been talking with one of our other scientists on our board, Julie Murphy, who's been studying the wild horses up in Alpine, Heber, and Salt River. And he'd been talking to her about, she's been following my research, and Julie got Wayne interested, and then Wayne recently joined. In fact, Wayne's coming up to the wilderness here just in about a week to see our herd of horses. So yeah, Wayne is one of the sharp knives in the drawer. He's a smart guy. He gets it. He understands it. He's not political. We're just looking at this. What's right for everybody? We don't want to, you know, we realize we're a society where we have to share this planet together. It's finite. The resources are finite, and nobody gets to have all of it. So, and that includes the horses deserve a piece of it. So, especially where they do good.
Yeah, and I think that the thing I like about the answer you gave to my previous question, and as I say, I was pretty certain I knew what the answer was going to be. It's certainly how I feel and how I come from. But the fact that you mentioned keystone species, I think is critical, because for the planet to survive, we need keystone species. And sadly, here in Australia, a lot of those keystone species are gone. And if we want to get Australia's balance back, our only choice now is to actually introduce one. We've already got it here. Why are we, you know, so determined to remove it and set ourselves backwards? And I've long said from my personal observations, and I cover a lot of ground. You know, I'm not just going to the same little patch every day. I cover across 3 different states and various areas. But from my observations compared to what I'm hearing the scientific community driving forward with, they're 180 degrees out of kilter with the real situation. And you know, I agree with you, greed, money, they do these studies, they get grants, they never actually do a complete study. They'll look at negative impact, but refuse to look at positive contribution to give that balanced report. You know, greed is blinding them to the fact that they're looking at this 180 degrees wrong, because they're looking at this from the human perspective rather than from the actual natural ecological perspective.
Yeah,
Is
one of the
that
big
what you're getting
problems
there
is,
too?
yeah, Dean, you know, and I'm just going to say it. Okay. The bottom line is, and any professor, if they're being honest with you, if you're a department head, if you put out a report that flies in the face of what the ag industry wants, in other words, if you talk about the benefits of wild horses, you're not going to get another grant. You're going to get blackballed. And so if you're a department head, to keep your job, you have to get grants. You have to show the university that you're bringing in money. And so what happens is, if everybody is being very careful about what they say or write because they don't want to step on anybody's toes, especially the big industries, Cargill, Monsanto, John Deere, Bayer here in America, who support the ag industry, they would like to see everything livestock grazing. I mean, really, they don't even care. I mean, they're looking at the Brazilian model. Just take down the whole Amazon forest and make it livestock grazing. Well, that's what they've been doing down there. And now our beef industry can't even compete with the Brazilian beef industry because they've got so much grazing land because they took out the Amazon. You know, I think, I don't know, 30% of it is gone now for livestock grazing. We can't make beef that cheap. And so, you know, I think Walmart gets all their meat from different places in the world. They don't buy any meat in America anymore. So what do? You know, the bottom line is people need courage, because it's about their grandkids. It's about their children. You know, if we keep going down this path, it's not going to be a fun place to live. You know, you talked about smoke. You look at GEOS Institute, they put out a report. They're in Zurich, Switzerland, or somewhere. It's all the Swiss German scientists, the real smart guys. They put out a report last year, and they said that wildfire smoke now produces more carbon and greenhouse gases than all of the fossil fuels being burned around the planet for power generation. That is a remarkable statement. And so we've got to get this fire under control. And the thing is, too, is when you breathe this smoke, guess what? It kills you. You know, if you know this, Dean, firefighters, once they retire, they don't live very long. They die. Here in America, the average lifespan of a firefighter once he retires is 5 years. And it's from all the hydrocarbons and the particulates that they've been inhaling. Well, guess what? Civilians are breathing that stuff in too. It's killing everybody. It's killing the wildlife. We've got to stop these fires.
Yeah, I agree with you.
You mentioned Linklater. So you said he'd done a study. Was that in Australia? He did that study?
New Zealand, I believe.
New
it.
Zealand.
I could be
that would
wrong.
be interesting.
I believe it was
Okay.
New Zealand.
Okay, that's very
And
interesting.
I guess he had an outcome that some people didn't appreciate. He was telling the truth, and when you tell the truth, some people don't like it. A lot of people don't like the truth.
It's interesting,
especially when they make lots of money.
Yeah, the scientists. My experience has been that scientists like to get on a bit of a gravy train. We have the Centre for Invasive Species Solutions, which is a bit of a breeding ground of scientists who, you've got to be careful what I say here, but they seem in my opinion, to be very careful about how they present their reports. And the Invasive Species Council are actually advisors to the government, and they are the opposition to Brombies. So they're advising the government. They also advise on the use of 1080 poison and the Centre for Invasive Species Solution. In fact, one of those organisations wrote the policy for what's called the Wild Dog Strategy Plan, which is used by governments to implement the use of 1080 poison to kill wild dogs, which, as we now know, thanks to dingo genetic research, practically nil. There is very little hybridization, in fact. And stock loss to predation figures that an organisation that I'm involved in has actually proven it's actually negligible. Stock loss to predation by dingoes is negligible, particularly compared with the flock sizes. So you might have, say, for example, millions of sheep, and yet there might be stock loss to, in 1 year, like 10,000 sheep. Now, that's not a good example, but it's that kind of figure. If you're going to be running stock or grazing sheep and you want to do that, then if you've got a country or where you have a native apex land predator, stock loss is going to be part of that. And you've got to take whatever action is necessary, implement other tools, such as appropriate fencing, or introduce donkeys or other animals that can act as a guardian, such as a maremma. So that's some of the problems we've got here in the use of 1080 poison. It's really in control of agriculture. That's part of the problem. And I see that's probably all part of this bigger problem with Brombies as well. That's in my opinion.
Yeah, well, the livestock industry is famous for creating their own problems. And okay, one of the issues is because our deer population in California and Oregon is so collapsed, we're down 3 million deer. What's happened is the apex predators, which are survivors, the lions, the bears, the wolves, the coyotes, they're moving down out of the wilderness because there's no more deer to eat. And guess what they're eating? They're eating livestock now. They moved into the agricultural areas looking for a meal. They're eating people's pets. They're coming down out of the mountains. People tell me, oh, Bill, there's plenty of deer. Look at Ashland, Oregon. They're on everybody's lawns. Well, guess why the remaining few deer on people's lawns? Because they know lions and bears and wolves don't like people. So they move into the town for protection, And then when you look at livestock production in terms of having a predator-free environment, okay, if you have a balanced ecosystem where you have plenty of native herbivores or even non-native herbivores, like you put horses into a wilderness area, what's going to happen is some of the predation is going to happen on those horses. And that's needed. Okay, wild horses need natural predation. It's part of natural selection. Keeps the vigor of the species. They don't randomly just kill healthy horses. They take out the horses that are sick, that are weak, that are diseased, and that keeps the herd healthy. But that does the livestock industry a benefit, because if the wolves and the bears or the dingoes are on the horses, then they're not eating the sheep and the cattle. And see, I'm trying to educate some of our local ranchers, hey, if we don't have any deer, that's going to take a long time to fix because you guys mismanaged all the deer. You let the hunters shoot too many. The cars in the roads are hitting them. We're collapsed. And that takes a while to get them back. We got horses right now we can relocate, and that's the thing. Put the horses in the right location. They're a big benefit. Of course, if you put a bunch of horses in the wrong spot, they're going to be a problem, no doubt. But if you put them in the right spot, they're worth $72,000 each. Boom. So we have to be smart. We have to play chess, not checkers. I tell all these politicians I know, start playing chess, forget checkers, because we're not going to win the game in 2 moves.
We don't have that problem though in our national parks. We don't have that competition between Brombies and cattle. What we've got is a socio-political issue. We got another question, which brings us back to other issues. But there's a question here from Karen. When an Australian professor, we all know who that is, makes a very silly recorded comment that Australian-wide brumbies eat dead brumbies, and that was actually something that was said by a professor here who reports claiming that brumbies were starving. All sanity and logic has gone out the window. These scientists are connected to well-funded conservation groups and having so much influence over politicians from all parties. How do we stop the inhumane brumby cull? That's a question. Our brumbies are in a really desperate situation at the moment, true. A large group of conservationists and activists will stop at nothing to prove they are right. When this science experiment goes wrong, it will be too late. So that's a bit, I'm not sure, William, if you can answer that, but what are your thoughts on that question? I think Karen's asking, have you got any suggestions?
Yeah, that's really a deep question. It's it goes to the heart of the matter, which is, you've got this huge economic pressure. You've got academics who are hanging by a string for grant money, and they don't have autonomy. Science has lost its autonomy. I just read an article by a climate scientist who said he modified his study so that he could even get published. In other words, it wasn't the whole truth, just so he could get published. And that's on the mainstream media. It's Patrick Brown, a climatologist, came out and confessed that he twisted the truth just to get published. There's all kinds of NIH studies now, National Institute of Health. If you Google malfeasance in science or corruption in science at NIH, it'll bring up all kinds of, now the scientific community is now policing itself for the malfeasance and the corruption within the community, politically and economically designed studies for a predetermined outcome. That has to end. That has to end because it's killing everybody. And the people, these scientists don't realize that doing what they're doing, that's letting a rabid dog loose. It's going to eventually come bite them on the butt. We have to, honesty is the best policy. I know it's not as profitable sometimes, but we've got to look at the long term. It's better to make a little bit of money for a very long time than make a lot of money and then have it end. Okay. If the merry-go-round stops because you're doing it wrong, you don't make as much money. You just don't. That's a bottom line in economics. So we have to be smarter. It can't be a smash and grab operation economically. And so these scientists, we need to have, go to the legislature, and we need to have changes in the whole structure of getting grant money. In other words, you can't have grants designed. You can't have a big corporation come in and design a scientific study that's supposed to be independent. Here's the money, go find the truth. Not here's the money and here's what we'd like it to say. Okay, we've got to have some legislation that says you can't do that. And if you do that, if you get caught doing that, you're going to lose your academic status. There needs to be a penalty. Okay, if you get caught doing that as an academic, there has to be a penalty for that. Probably a fine. It has to be a $5,000 fine or whatever it is in Australia, and loss of credential or censure for making up a fake study. That stuff has got to get punished. It's got to go away.
I wish that were introduced here, because there's a lot of reports floating around that are basically flawed.
Look, I agree with you both, and it was very interesting. I read a report not too long ago, maybe a month or so. Now, I think it was only relevant to Victoria. I'm not sure that it was for the entirety of Australia. But education in Victoria is now our state's second largest export. So our government make the second largest amount of economic input to itself by exporting education to international students. And I'm just wondering, you know, we all know grants, funding, we know the corruption that goes on, predetermined outcomes so as they ensure their next line of funding. It'd be interesting to see if we could find a direct link between that and the fact that they're doing that to generate new students into education, which is an industry in Victoria now, that sort of creates that perpetual cycle of we'll get a new batch of students in from overseas and then we'll indoctrinate them with all of these ideas based off half-done, well-funded, incorrect studies to perpetuate their own industry and their own financial future. And I know, you know, William's been referencing the agricultural industry in America and the impact that's having on open grazing landscapes. And in reality, the closest comparison I can find to that here in Victoria at the moment is in America, it's grazing. In Victoria, it's education as an industry has its second highest monetary value from an export point of view.
That's really interesting, Dean. I wasn't aware of that. That's very interesting. I'm just wondering how you can, how could that be carried over into, I'm not sure what you're suggesting. Should we all, those of us, yeah?
I don't know that I'm suggesting anything. I'm just sort of very quickly coming to sort of a correlation of the science is being skewed, to use a phrase, the science is being bastardized to drive the continuation of an industry. Education is not now a passing on knowledge, a doing research, a teaching people how to think for themselves, ask a question and go looking for the answers. It's become an industry now whereby in your first year, we're going to teach you how to bend and fold the panels. In your second year, we're going to tell you how to cast an engine block. In your third year, we're going to teach you how to put it all together. And then in your fourth year, we're going to teach you how to sell it. In that context of, you know, we don't have free thinking people anymore. We have people paying a lot of money into an industry and have to sit there and the only way to get a passing grade in that is to agree with the professor who's sprouting whatever he's sprouting. There's no encouragement anymore for those people to actually go out and do studies and do research to effectively prove that their professor's wrong.
So in other words, it's more about those people who are living the experience, as William himself said earlier, and yourself, your experience of actually going up into the Australian Alpine Park is so important. There is not enough emphasis placed on that. I think that was the importance and the value of Dr. David Berman's research. I'm not sure if it was only published in July this year, William. He did first-hand observational study in the Australian Alpine Park, and he actually found that he studied the impacts, but all impacts of brumbies, and he used dung piles as, you know, across the board. 1% in the most pristine area in Victoria, the Bogong High Plains, 1% impact. It was just mind-blowing that, and these brumbies are particularly have a strong heritage value in that they hold whaler DNA connected to our war horses. They actually slaughtered 40 of those low numbers of brumbies last year, the park's managers, because they're allegedly impacting in a negative way a pristine area, yet Dr. Berman proved 1% impact. Sorry, I cut across you then.
Yeah, no, Dean, Dean really, that was an eloquent, high-level observation of academics. You know, the academic process, and again, I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush. We do have some very interesting academic institutions that are trying to break the mold. And, like Professor Linklater, that guy is, I mean, he's a cutting edge thinker. And which, I really, every time him and I talk, I mean, it's just really, it's enlightening. But what's happening in a lot of the universities is exactly right. They're becoming paid partisan to support corporate operations. Basically, they're almost like salespeople. So, you get a new drug. For instance, Big Pharma is easy to do an analogy with. They got a drug that they can patent to make a lot of money. Well, then what they do is they hire some scientists to go conduct a clinical study that says that it's really great. So it's basically an advertising campaign wrapped in a scientific, study. And then they go, oh, look, we did this clinical study, this stuff's great, here's the benefits and features. And then they go forward and make a boatload of money. Well, when you look at all these studies that are coming out, you see people will turn to the back page and see who funded it. And that tells you, like, if it's, Pfizer, or if it's, one of the big, livestock company supporters, Bayer, or John Deere, or, there's all these big corporations, Monsanto, that they're all about supporting the agricultural industry. They want studies that help them make more money. And they're willing to pay you. If you're a scientist with a PhD, they're going to use you. They're just going to use you because you have that PhD. Now, guys like me, I'm not taking their money. So I'm just going to tell people exactly what I see because I'm not influenced by money. That's why our organization, Wild Horse Fire Brigade, is an all-volunteer organization. We're not influenced by money one way or the other. We go out there, we find the truth, and then we tell everybody, here's what we see. Period. Let the chips fall where they are, but when you're an academic and you're all about getting more money for your department and churning out more like-minded people, peer-reviewed, that just means everybody agreed. Alan Savory talked about that. Peer review doesn't mean anything. Peer review is actually a stumbling block to new science. New science is new because it hasn't been peer reviewed. It's brand new. It's not like everybody all agrees. Was Jane Goodall's discovery that apes made and used tools peer reviewed? Heck no. That was brand new science. Peer review just means everybody agrees. That's consensus. That's a collaborative consensus. But that's not real science. That's everybody just agreeing on something. And they usually all agree on something because they know they're all going to make money or they're going to get grants. So it's hard. New paradigms like what Dean's talking about, what we're talking about, what you're talking about, Marilyn, new paradigms that can basically break some people's rice bowls, so to speak, are, you're going to create friction. That's the problem. You're going to create friction. The BLM makes a lot of money with the wild horse roundups. So the concept that we don't need to do it that way, we can move them as humanely as family bands into our deep wilderness where they can be wild and free and prevent fire. They think about that. We don't like that because we're not going to get as much money. And so there's friction. And so they try to get scientists to say, oh, that, Bill's idea, we're not sure it's going to work. There could be negative impacts. Well, wild horses have been North America for 4 million years. The Ecobalas, the modern horse, what negative impacts? If there was going to be negative impacts, they would have happened in 4 million years. It would have been a done deal already. So, when logic always defeats these guys.
Yeah.
One of our big problems in this country is the poisons industry. Controls agriculture, and that controls the environment departments. It's agriculture. That's the poisons industry. And I do believe there's a linking in there with the brumbies because they're part of the environment. And that comes down to the poison makers, and that's all connected with the Australian wool industry. They fund a lot of, they fund the Wild Dog Strategy Plan, which is all about killing dingoes. So we've got a big problem, and it's related to the agriculture as well.
Yeah, you look at Monsanto, you look at glyphosate, Roundup, right? Glyphosate. So they say, oh, we get rid of all the invasive stuff on the agricultural land. So they use this glyphosate, kills all the plants. Well, we got a problem because our crops won't grow because the soil's contaminated with glyphosate. Oh, well, we'll create a hybrid plant that can grow in glyphosate, you know, so they create Roundup ready crops now, right? So they've done genetics to create seedable crops that are Roundup ready, meaning the Roundup doesn't affect them. They're immune to the Roundup. I mean, and why do they go through these things? Because they make a boatload of money at each stage, you know, and now if you don't have Roundup ready crops, you know, you're not going to even have a crop anymore. You know, I mean, you got to look at this. I mean, we're painting ourselves into a corner here, and it's going to be ugly. It's going to get real ugly real fast. We've got to be smarter. You know, we need more meetings like this. We need more people telling the truth that aren't financed or incentivized by money, that are out there talking about these problems. And I'm trying to start with wildfire, because right now we're burning the forests in America faster than they're coming back by a rapid rate. The rate of decline of our forests is frightening. It's frightening, and it's not sustainable. I mean, it's going to happen, you know, maybe in my lifetime, I'll see if we don't change this trajectory, we're going to lose all of our forests. And then
it's quite frightening. Dean, did you have any more questions, or anybody that's any of our guests? Because I noticed we've now 12:35, which that's okay by me, but we might start winding it down. Dean, have you got a question, or anybody else?
I haven't got a question. I just want to say thank you for putting this together, and thank you, William, for coming on board, mate. It's nice to sit back and talk with people that are on the other side of the globe, but have observed and experienced, I'm not going to say exactly the same thing, but very, very similar things to what I've observed here and experienced here. And, you know, I'm not going to say validates, I'm not going to say vindicates, but it just feels good to know that I'm not on my own in my way of thinking, and that, you know, my thought processes on my observations are justified. So thank you very, very much. It's been great, and we need to talk more.
I'd like to reiterate that, as lawyers do. Thank you, William. Thank you so much for agreeing to join this today. It's just been wonderful. You mentioned an equine scientist who PhD, equine scientist who might be interested in joining a webinar. Is that would you think that would be possible?
Oh yeah, I can probably get Wayne to come on, Dr. Linkletter, and then I wanted to say this so everybody listening understands. There are a lot of people who think like we do, Dean and Marilyn. They're just afraid to say it out loud. But there's a lot of people who think just like we do. And some of them are in academic. Yeah, there's a lot of people out there, trust me. And even the insurance industry now is looking at what we're talking about at Wild Horse Fire Brigade. They're saying, you know what, this makes sense. You know, if we reduce the fire, we're not going to have to spend all this billions of dollars every year on losses. And so there are people listening, and it's slow. You know, we've got this big ship. We got the Titanic going in this direction. It's going to take time to turn this ship. Okay. It's going to take time. So we can't give up. The people out there who haven't opened their, you know, spoken their minds yet, they need to, you know, become vocal, join the activism, you know, get involved, let people know, send emails, send letters, call people up on the phone. You know, don't sit there on social media. Nobody reads that. You got to get out there on the phone. You got to get in.
I'm a great one for encouraging people. Write to your members of parliament. So that's, you know, it's really hard for us here in Australia to get into media. The mainstream media is controlled by the extremist conservationists. Very difficult. We're
cracking in. We are cracking through, because guess what? Everybody, like I said, a lot of people thinks just what we're saying. They won't say it out loud yet because they're, you know, people are very trendy and they don't want to feel like they're out of sorts. But you know, the media now is covering Wild Horse Fire Brigade nationally and internationally. So that means there's a change in the thought process. People's homes are burning. You know, all these billionaires, guess what? They have homes that are burning to the ground too. They don't like the inconvenience. They want to stop fire and smoke. Their insurance rates are going up.
We've
So,
got one
you know,
very
we're
quick
gonna make
question.
progress.
A quick question
Yep.
that's popped up. Well, two. Helen Milliken would like to say thank you very much as well, which is lovely. Thank you, Helen, you too. Karen says, from my own research, the conservationist groups were funded and set up by international philanthropists. We now have Australian scientists or lobbyists with past and present connections to these groups, now in control of New South Wales National Parks and Invasive Species Council. The media seem to be silenced. The dots all need to be connected as quickly as possible before it's too late. I personally, I'd like to, I know that William agree and Dean, but I hear you, Karen. I don't know how we can save our brumbies, but it's not just in New South Wales, it's Victoria. We have brumbies in Victoria as well, Karen, that are under immediate and imminent threat. Once that Senate inquiry makes a recommendation, I think it's going to be a very big worry. So how we stem that flow, I'm not quite sure. So the question is, well, I think Karen's simply sharing. Media seems to be silenced. So how we connect those dots is a big problem. Yeah, but maybe as William suggests, we just need to keep speaking out off social media. Something I agree entirely with William when it comes to that. Get off social media. So thank
Call
you.
people up. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dean and Marilyn.
Thank you. William.
Thanks, mate. We have to talk again soon.
Yeah, thank you very
Absolutely.
much. Bye. And thank you everybody that's come along to the webinar. It has been recorded and it will be up on Brumby Action Group and shared, I hope. So bye. Over and out.
See you all.
So long.
Bye. Bye, Dean. Bye.